Have you ever been judged before you even spoke a word? Marcus Reed wasn't speeding. He wasn't breaking any laws. Yet when the flashing lights appeared behind him, he knew exactly what was coming. The question was, how far would they take it this time? The night was quiet, too quiet. Special Agent Marcus Reed gripped the wheel of his black SUV, eyes scanning the near-empty road. It had been a long day. Meetings, reports, the usual bureaucracy. He was just a few miles from home, craving nothing but silence and a stiff drink. Then he saw the flashing lights. Red and blue flickered in his rearview mirror, slicing through the darkness. A patrol car. Marcus frowned. He hadn't been speeding. No sudden turns. No traffic violations. So why were they stopping him? His pulse stayed steady, but something about the situation felt off. He signaled, pulled over, and took a deep breath. The SUV hummed softly as he shifted into park. Hands visible. No sudden movements. He'd been trained for situations like this. In the mirror, two officers stepped out of their vehicle. Their body language made his instincts twitch. The first, broad-shouldered, maybe mid-40s, moved with sharp, aggressive steps. His partner, leaner but tense, lingered back, fingers resting near his holster. Marcus knew that stance. They weren't just stopping him. They were preparing for something. His jaw tightened. He'd dealt with racial profiling before. He could already predict how this would go. The probing questions, the suspicious glances, the silent challenge to his presence in a nice car, on a nice road, at the wrong time. The lead officer reached his window. Bam! A flat palm slammed against the glass. Marcus didn't flinch. License and registration. The words weren't a request. They were a test. Marcus exhaled slowly, keeping his movements deliberate as he reached for his credentials. The air was thick with unspoken tension. Something told him this wouldn't be just another traffic stop. The moment Marcus rolled down his window, he felt it. The weight of judgment. The officer's presence loomed, his stance wide, his jaw tight. Power dripped from his voice. Bam! A palm smacked the glass again, harder this time. License and registration. Marcus didn't rush, didn't react. He knew better. Instead, he reached into his jacket with measured movements, pulling out his wallet. The second officer, Davis according to his badge, hovered near the rear of the SUV, hand resting on his holster. His fingers tapped against the leather, a slow, deliberate rhythm, like he was waiting, hoping. Marcus handed over his ID in a black leather case. Inside, his federal credentials, Homeland Security, the kind of badge that should have ended this stop immediately. Carter barely glanced at it. You sure this car belongs to you? Marcus locked eyes with him. There it was, the assumption, the accusation hidden beneath a smirk. A familiar burn crept up his spine, but he forced it down. He wouldn't give them what they wanted. Instead, he kept his voice smooth, controlled. That information is right there on my registration. Carter smirked, flipping through the documents like he was stalling. Then he chuckled. Pretty nice ride. Marcus didn't answer. Carter nodded to Davis, who shifted, adjusting his stance. Something unspoken passed between them. Marcus knew this game. He'd seen it before. The slow escalation, the deliberate baiting. Carter leaned in, voice dropping lower. You in a hurry? Marcus met his gaze. Just trying to get home. Carter's smirk widened. Not yet, you're not. He turned, walking back toward the patrol car. But he wasn't running the ID, he was waiting. Dragging this out. Marcus gripped the wheel tighter, jaw flexing. He could feel it coming. The next move, the power play. Marcus watched Carter stroll back to the patrol car, moving slow, too slow. He wasn't checking the ID. He was stalling. At the squad car, Carter leaned in, whispering something to Davis. The second officer nodded, his eyes never leaving Marcus, like a predator locking onto prey. The air inside the SUV felt thicker now. Marcus could hear the soft hum of his own breathing, the faint rustling of leaves outside. He had seen this game before. Stretch out the stop, turn patience into frustration, make the target slip. Not tonight. Carter returned, flipping the ID between his fingers like a useless playing card. Step out of the vehicle. Marcus stayed still. Why? Carter tilted his head, smirk still in place. You refusing a lawful order? Marcus let out a slow breath. I'm refusing an unlawful one. Davis shifted again, his fingers curling near his holster. Carter's smirk twitched. He wasn't expecting pushback. I won't ask again, Carter said, voice dropping into something colder. Marcus held his gaze, weighing his options. He could push back harder, demand a supervisor, but that would only escalate things, and he wasn't about to let them control the pace. So he chose silence. Controlled, measured silence. Carter tapped his fingers against his belt, exhaling sharply. He turned to Davis. Call it in. Marcus's pulse stayed steady, but he knew what was happening. Backup, a show of force. Turn this into a spectacle. He flexed his fingers against the wheel, then glanced in the side mirror. Bystanders. A few people watching from the sidewalk, phones already in hand. Good. He slowly reached for the door handle. Not in fear, not in surrender, but in strategy. The second he stepped out, he'd be at their mercy, but they wouldn't be able to hide. Cameras were watching now, and the moment he moved, the show would begin. Marcus moved slowly, deliberate, calculated. As he stepped out of the SUV, the night air felt sharper, heavier. All eyes were on him now. A few bystanders had gathered, phones held high, recording. The glow of their screens cut through the dim streetlights. This wasn't just a traffic stop anymore. It was a performance. Carter's smirk returned as he stepped forward. He wanted an audience. Hands on the hood. His voice carried, thick with authority. Marcus didn't resist, didn't argue. He placed his palms against the SUV, his muscles coiled but calm. He knew how this played out. Carter didn't hesitate. He shoved Marcus forward, hard. Gasps rippled through the small crowd. Someone cursed. Another whispered, "This is messed up." Marcus exhaled slowly, keeping his posture firm. Don't react. Don't give them an excuse. Davis stood back, his fingers still resting on his holster. He wasn't intervening, just watching. A woman in the crowd called out, "He didn't do anything." Carter ignored her. Instead, he leaned in, voice low, laced with something smug. "Think you're tough, huh?" Marcus didn't move, didn't blink. He refused to play their game. But Carter wasn't done. "You smell that, Davis?" he said, sniffing the air. "Something suspicious." Marcus stiffened. "Here we go." The murmurs in the crowd grew louder. The cameras kept rolling. And just like that, the situation took a dangerous turn. Marcus could feel the shift. The game was changing. Carter stepped closer, nostrils flaring. "You smell that, Davis?" Davis tilted his head, playing along. "Yeah, something's off." Marcus stayed still, but his pulse ticked up. "Here it comes." Carter circled him like a predator. "Step away from the car. We need to conduct a search." Marcus turned his head slightly. "That's not happening." Carter's smirk widened. "You refusing a lawful order again?" Marcus kept his voice steady. "You have no probable cause." The crowd murmured louder now. Someone yelled, "He knows his rights." Carter's smirk twitched. He didn't like that. "You think you're smart, huh?" he muttered, stepping in closer. Too close. Marcus met his gaze, unflinching. "I think I know the law." That was it. That was the trigger. Carter grabbed Marcus's wrist, twisting it behind his back. Gasps erupted. A woman screamed. The cameras zoomed in. Pain shot up Marcus's arm, but he didn't fight. He wouldn't give them that. Carter tightened his grip, his breath hot against Marcus's ear. "You're under arrest." Marcus didn't flinch. "For what?" Carter hesitated, just for a second. Davis shifted uncomfortably, glancing at the recording phones. He could feel it too. This wasn't going their way. Marcus exhaled, voice eerily calm. "You sure you want to do that?" Carter's grip tightened. "Yeah?" He let out a laugh. "And why's that?" Marcus slowly turned his head, just enough for Carter to see the Homeland Security badge clipped to his belt. Silence. Davis paled. Carter's breath hitched. The realization hit like a freight train. Marcus's voice was low, steady, deadly. "You just made the biggest mistake of your career." The crowd erupted. Some laughed in disbelief. Others shouted. Phones kept rolling, capturing every second. Carter's face drained of color. Davis took a step back. For the first time that night, they were the ones panicking. Marcus flexed his fingers, still cuffed behind his back. He wasn't worried. He was about to watch their downfall begin. The woman recording gasped, "Oh my God, did they really just—" Another man's voice cut in. "Homeland Security. They're done." Carter tried to regain control. "That badge doesn't mean anything." Marcus let a slow smile creep across his face. "Oh, it means everything." The weight of the moment settled over them like a crushing force. The officers weren't in charge anymore. The show had just begun. For the first time that night, Carter didn't have a comeback. His grip on Marcus's wrist loosened, his confidence cracking. The badge had shattered his illusion of control. Marcus could see it, the panic creeping in, the sweat forming on Carter's brow. He knew he messed up. Davis took a step back, clearing his throat. His eyes darted between Marcus and Carter. He wanted out of this mess. Marcus rolled his shoulders slightly, still restrained but far from powerless. "I'll ask again. You sure you want to do this?" Carter swallowed. Hard. He wasn't smirking anymore. You should have told us," he stammered. Marcus let out a dry chuckle. "I didn't have to." The crowd erupted. Laughter. Outrage. The energy shifted. The hunters had become the hunted. "Yo, they really just tried that?" someone muttered. "This is crazy," another voice said. Phones stayed up, recording every detail. The internet would have a front-row seat to Carter's downfall. Marcus stayed still, letting the weight of the moment settle, letting Carter feel the eyes on him. "You assaulted a federal agent," Marcus said, voice low. Each word hit like a hammer. Carter flinched. Davis looked like he wanted to disappear. Marcus sighed, shaking his head. "Biggest mistake of your career." Then slowly, he reached for his phone. Carter's breath hitched. His eyes darted to Davis, to the crowd, then back to Marcus. What are you doing?" Carter asked, voice uneven. Marcus held up his phone. "Making a call." Carter took a shaky breath. "Now listen, we can—" Marcus tapped the screen. "Sir, we have a situation." Davis cursed under his breath. The crowd buzzed with excitement. Carter swallowed hard, sweat forming on his forehead. His career was over, and he knew it. Davis took a step back. His face was pale, his confidence shattered. He had just realized they messed up. Carter, still gripping Marcus's wrist, opened his mouth, then shut it. For the first time, he had no control. Marcus's phone was already ringing. Loud, clear, the sound of their careers ending. Carter forced a smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Now listen, we can talk about this." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Talk? You had your chance." The call connected. A crisp voice came through. "Agent Reed, what's the situation?" Carter stiffened. Davis looked like he wanted to disappear. Marcus kept his voice calm, deadly calm. "I've been detained unlawfully. Officers, Carter and Davis." Carter's Adam's apple bobbed. His hand twitched at his side. Davis took another step back. "We didn't know who you were." Marcus let out a sharp laugh. "That's the problem, isn't it?" The crowd grew louder. Phones stayed up, recording every nervous tick, every drop of sweat on Carter's forehead. "Sir," Marcus continued into the phone, "I need immediate response to my location." Carter's face contorted. "Come on, man, do we have to?" Marcus didn't even look at him. "ETA?" "2 minutes," the voice confirmed. Carter's breath hitched. He turned to Davis, desperate. "What do we do?" Davis shook his head. "We're done." And they were. The silence was deafening. Carter and Davis stood frozen, their confidence drained, their fate sealed. They had lost control of the situation. The flashing lights of approaching squad cars painted the street in streaks of red and blue. Reinforcements had arrived, but not for them. Sergeant Lisa Monroe stepped out, her expression like carved stone. She had seen enough. Her sharp eyes swept over the scene. Marcus, calm and composed. Carter and Davis, stiff with panic. The recording crowd. She knew instantly what had happened. She exhaled through her nose, stepping up to Carter. "Hand me your badge." Carter blinked. "What?" She didn't repeat herself, just held out her hand, unyielding, unforgiving. Davis swallowed hard, his hands trembling. He knew this was the end. "Sergeant, wait, let's talk about this," Carter stammered. "It was a misunderstanding." Monroe's lip curled. A misunderstanding? She turned to Marcus. Agent Reed, are you injured? Marcus flexed his wrist where Carter had twisted it. Number. But they tried. Monroe's jaw tightened. She turned back to the officers. Your weapons. Your badges. Now. The crowd cheered. Someone whistled. Another muttered, about time. Carter looked to Davis. Davis looked at the ground. Defeated. One by one, they unhooked their belts, unclipped their badges. Monroe snatched them without another word. This isn't over, Carter muttered. Marcus finally smirked. Oh, it is for you. The weight of his words settled. Carter and Davis weren't cops anymore, and the world was about to know it. By morning, the video had spread like wildfire. Millions watched as two officers lost their badges in real time. The takedown of Carter and Davis was now public history. News anchors dissected every frame. Headlines screamed, "Federal agent wrongfully detained. Officers suspended indefinitely. Justice served. Rogue cops caught in the act." The police department scrambled. A public apology was issued, but the damage was done. Carter and Davis weren't just suspended. They were disgraced, stripped of power, stripped of protection. The internet didn't forget. Memes, debates, and furious think pieces flooded every platform. Imagine if he wasn't a federal agent. How many times has this happened with no cameras? Activists seized the moment. Marcus's case became a rallying cry. Protests sparked in cities across the country. The demand was clear: accountability, reform, change. But Marcus didn't bask in victory. He sat in his apartment, watching the news, jaw clenched, because he knew the truth. He was lucky. Others weren't. How many names had been forgotten? How many stories erased? A knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. It was Monroe. You good? She asked. Marcus exhaled. Number. But I know what I have to do. Monroe nodded. She already knew too. The battle wasn't over. It was just beginning. The stage was set. The room was packed. Cameras lined the back wall, their lenses locked on Marcus. He took a slow breath, gripping the edges of the podium. This was bigger than him now. He looked over the crowd. Activists, officials, ordinary citizens. People who wanted answers. People who wanted change. My name is Marcus Reed, he began, voice steady. I had a badge. I had authority. And still I was treated like I didn't belong. The room was silent, listening, waiting. I knew my rights. I had proof of who I was. And still, it wasn't enough. A murmur rippled through the crowd. He let it settle before continuing. But what if I wasn't a federal agent? What if there were no cameras? The weight of that question filled the room. He glanced at the journalists scribbling furiously, capturing every word. This isn't just about me, he said. This is about the people who never got their stories told, the ones who weren't believed, the ones who didn't get justice. A pause, a breath. I stand here today not as a victim, but as a witness, and I refuse to let this moment fade. Applause rose, slow at first, then building. Marcus stepped back from the podium, his jaw tight. The fight wasn't over, not even close. This was just the beginning. The movement had started,